Hi, everyone. I'm Anya Parampil. Welcome to the Grayzone. My guest today is congressional candidate Joe Kent. Joe Kent, welcome.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
I wanted to start by asking about something that actually happened in the Democratic Party on Capitol Hill last week. You are running as a Republican, but I thought you would be interested in responding to the fact that last week the Congressional Progressive Caucus, these are supposed to be the most progressive members of Congress, released a letter calling on the Biden administration to push for a diplomatic solution to the conflict in Ukraine. And then within 24 hours, remarkably, these same members of Congress came out and retracted the letter, essentially blamed members of their staff for releasing it without them having given final approval, and claimed, oh, we signed this letter months ago, and now we actually don't support this position anymore. Things on the ground have changed. What did you make of that episode, and how, if you were in Congress right now, would you have responded to it?
At first, I was really actually excited and relieved to see that there was members of the other party that were saying the obvious, that we should stop just blanket giving billions and billions of dollars in arms to the Ukrainians, and we should be making every effort to get both parties, Russia and Ukraine, to the negotiating table. So overall, I was really relieved, because I think the worst thing that we've seen from this whole escalation in Ukraine here, US, as far as American politics go, is that there's no one dissenting from it on the Democrat side. There's people on, I think, every side of it. On the Republican side of the aisle, I mean, there's some that are like me that think we need to not be sending that money over there and pursuing peace. There's others that are more hawkish. But on the Democrat side, they are completely on board with these continued escalations, almost like the Cheney Bush wing of the Republican Party is now writing foreign policy for the Democrats. So I was really relieved to see that the House progressives came out and actually did something not progressive, not Republican, not Democrat, but something that's just common sense for the American people. But unfortunately, within, I don't know if that letter lasted even 12 hours. It seemed like just a couple hours later, they were blaming it on the staff, which is kind of hard to believe because they had all signed it already. So it just paints a picture of how I think just partisan things are, but also just the grip that the military industrial complex, the national security blob, whatever you want to call it, has on the Democrat Party right now.
And what would you have done if you were working in Congress, sitting on the Hill when this letter came out, and you were seeing the news play out in the media, but these would have been colleagues of yours, perhaps just down the hallway?
I don't know how much sway I would have over them, but look, Pramila Jayapal is from Washington State. She's the representative up in Seattle, and I would have definitely approached her or anybody else who signed that letter. Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, AOC, the people who I probably disagree with on like 99% of most issues, but especially to Representative Jayapal, I would have said, hey, this is a place where I think Washington State can really show some real leadership. Let's, you and I, who everyone knows we're on the opposite side of things, let's really push for peace together. Let's make peace a nonpartisan issue. And then I'd extend the same offer of assistance to anybody else that signed the letter, and hopefully other people that would encourage other Democrats to come over too. So I think there was a small window there for some great bipartisan cooperation, especially with populist leftists, populist folks on the right. But unfortunately, within a couple hours, that window seems like it got slammed shut.
Right. And it seems like there are, because you mentioned these are people that you probably do disagree with on 99% of the other issues. But at this point, it feels like there are two kinds of people, at least in U.S. politics, those who take the threat of nuclear war with Russia very seriously and would do anything to stop it, and those who don't really seem to understand the gravity of the situation. Or maybe there's a third group that understands the threat and somehow is so hyped up on war that they're just running directly into escalation in this conflict. So it was interesting to see all of this play out within the Progressive Caucus, just a little over a week after former Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard actually announced she was leaving the Democratic Party. She was quick, though, to run and endorse your campaign and has been in Washington State touring with you, even though, now she of course hasn't formally said that she's joining the Republican Party, but she's definitely putting this issue of endless war and military spending to the forefront of her focus right now. And you told me that as you've gone around your district with Tulsi, you're finding that obviously you're endorsed by former President Donald Trump. It's very easy for you to draw MAGA crowds, but especially when you're campaigning with someone like Tulsi, what kind of people are coming to your events? Are you finding that average U.S. voters fit in these boxes, Democrat, Republican?
For some people, they're still really happy with their partisan labels, but I think there is a growing silent majority of Americans who they're sick of the labels, and basically they don't want us to get into a nuclear war. So they understand how important this is. Just a common sense person who is terrified, especially over here on the West Coast, of what a nuclear war would entail. And look, the American people have seen what 20 years of war did to our country in relatively, smaller wars compared to what a nuclear exchange would be. And people have pattern recognition. I mean, the exact same rhetoric that's being used to justify this continued escalation against Putin, it's literally copy and paste, like why we have to go take out Saddam Hussein, why it's a good thing that we're going to go start bombing Libya. So people understand this regardless of what talking heads on TV say. So I'm getting a lot more independent-minded people, I would say. And then Tulsi also just leaving the Democrat Party. I think that she made it easier for people who already knew at a very basic level that things aren't right in the country. But for whatever reason, before they probably weren't okay with saying, now I'm going to vote for a Republican, or now I'm going to go to a Kent rally because he's associated with Trump. I think when Tulsi did that and she took that bold step forward, not just endorsing me, but when she articulated the reasons why she's leaving the Democrat Party, I think that there's a lot of people that were just like, oh, okay, yeah, that's exactly what I've been thinking. And I haven't had the courage to say out loud, and now it's okay. So we're getting a lot of folks that are just independents. They're sick of both sides of the aisle. And then especially on this big issue of war, they really want to see people say something other than the usual neoconservative, neoliberal justification for another war.
And what about within your own party, within the Republican Party? Obviously, what happened with the Progressive Caucus demonstrated, I think, more than anything, why someone like Tulsi could no longer work within the Democratic Party. I mean, or you're seeing the way a representative such as AOC and Ilhan Omar are completely melting down the moment any of their constituents challenge them.
All right, listen, okay, listen.
AOC and Ilhan Omar, they're actually saying, oh no, now peace and negotiations, these are right-wing talking points. You're pro-Putin, they'll just slap any label on you. It's gotten really outrageous, ridiculous to me. But there is still an element within the Republican Party as well that is hesitant to stand up against these wars and is actually in some ways collaborating with the Biden administration. How would you stand up to those elements within the Republican Party?
We can't back down. We can never allow ourselves to go back to the old doctrine of the Bush-Cheney eras. Look, the thing is, I mean, I fought in the military for 20 years, did 11 combat deployments. I'll be the first one to say that I really wish this stuff would have worked out. Trust me, nobody wanted the neoconservative doctrine to work more than me because I had so much skin in the game. But at the end of the day, reality is what it is. And like these things just did not work. And so for us to take the exact same model of intervention and then put it at a larger scale, like against Russia, a country with nuclear weapons. We fought the Cold War through diplomacy and economic power because we knew that we had to avoid a kinetic war with them. For us to take that same global war on terror mentality, to me, it's very basic and very common sense. And when we talk facts with people, like I think we start to win them over more. And then just the very basic, hey, we have real issues here in America. How can we address the border of of eastern Ukraine before we address our own southern border? So I think on every level, we're winning this argument. Obviously, Trump is the one that punched the beachhead in the Republican Party, especially as far as foreign policy goes. I mean, if you look at the Republican Party pre-Trump, which wasn't that long ago, we were still following the Bush and Cheney doctrine. It was still very hawkish. But now at this point, I feel like we probably have 50 to 60% of the caucus. And then when I talk about on the stump and I'm out there talking to very MAGA crowds, like even before Tulsi came out, when you're talking to MAGA crowds, they are not interested whatsoever in hearing about what, far-flung region of the world we need to send blood and treasure to anymore. And they understand what's going on in Russia at a very basic level, just because people they've seen these tactics used before. So I think we can't back down regardless of what pressure comes from the establishment.
And something else I'm curious about is obviously for voters, the number one issue is always going to be the economy. But as you're out on the campaign trail and speaking with constituents, are you finding that, because I'm getting this sense, but I'm not speaking to people the way you are, for the first time, I feel like average people here are starting to connect our foreign policy to the economic situation we have here, to issues like inflation and rising gas prices. You can't really separate those issues from even the war in Ukraine. Are you finding that people are understanding that?
Yes, I mean when our economy is doing well and people have jobs and it doesn't cost $5.50 per gallon to fill up your tank, I think the American people can sort of be lulled into a sense of complacency, and they don't see that our government is sending billions of dollars overseas. It's an all volunteer military, so a lot of people don't understand troop deployments and what the true cost of war is. However, when the economy is as bad as it is right now, when crime is as bad as it is right now, you have Americans asking just a very basic question of like, hey, what is my government's priority right now? Like, I'm still paying taxes. I'm being crushed by inflation. Yet all I hear from Washington, D.C. is how we need to send billions and billions of dollars to a country that, quite frankly, most Americans can't locate on a map. So, and that's fine, because that country doesn't affect us very much. It's very common sense. So people are connecting these big picture agenda items, especially when it comes to the energy economy. Everyone knows that just 2 years ago you could afford to fill up the tank, and because of Biden's push towards green energy, killing off Keystone XL, that now we're in this energy crisis and we're depleting our strategic petroleum reserves. Yet we're approaching a potential conflict. So again, it comes down to priorities, and you don't have to have a PhD in national defense or the economy just to understand that we don't have competent or sane people at the helm right now.
And economic sanctions and that aspect of warfare are often left out of a discussion of foreign policy, but definitely the fact that when you have an administration buying or banning certain countries from selling their oil to U.S. companies and to U.S. entities. I mean, that whether it's Venezuela or Russia, that really at this point only seems like sanctions against the U.S. People, because, yeah, Putin and Maduro can go find somebody else to go buy their oil, but we might have to deal with higher prices. One issue where you're definitely more of a traditional conservative, and it's been one of the major issues in your district, even though you're in Washington State, is that of the southern border. I think there's a chance to talk about how U.S. foreign policy is also driving the crisis at the southern border. This is something that I've seen myself, having traveled and covered countries throughout Central and South America, Venezuela, Honduras. I find that these places are actually affected by, for example, in 2009, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and President Barack Obama oversaw a coup in Honduras, destabilized the country there, plunged it into record rates of poverty and crime. And that really drove the immigration crisis that we saw play out years later at the U.S. southern border. How do you think we can make that connection when we're talking about the border crisis? How is U.S. policy also responsible, the same issues that you've discussed with endless war and intervention abroad, driving that crisis as well?
Yeah, I mean, our presence down in South America, we've done this in several countries. You pointed out the recent one in 2009. But again, it's like, what was the overall goal for taking those actions? I mean, I think people understand we need to have an intelligence community to keep us safe. But then when we're down there playing these regime change games, it never tends to work out well with the intent in the long term that we had. So I'm not sure exactly what Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were thinking when they funded that one, but it's like, at the end of the day, it destabilized the region. These people are still our neighbors. This is going to have an adverse effect on us, especially if we refuse to secure our borders, which has been basically the policy of the Democrat Party for quite a while now. So, I mean, I think we just need much more accountability and transparency, but then obviously just doing the common sense things. I think this is why, like, Trump, he caught on fire so quickly in 2016, because he was just saying, like, let's just build a wall, and, people have locks on their doors. So it just sort of makes sense. And now it's like, well, what is the reason for Biden on day one of his administration saying the border's wide open? Why is the DHS, as opposed to trying to take care of the border crisis right now, why are they facilitating a flow of all these illegal immigrants into the heartland of America and the fentanyl that comes along with it? So, and these are big issues, because, like, my district, even though we're geographically not close to the border, we're right between sanctuary cities. Portland's to our south, Seattle's to our north, I-5 runs right through it. So we're basically a border town. And I think most major U.S. cities are that way at this point. So we really need a U.S. foreign policy, especially when it comes to people that are our neighbors in our hemisphere, that really reflects the national security interests of our country. And securing our border and ensuring that there isn't a crisis of illegal immigrants or just migrants in general, that to me seems to be very much in our direct national security interest.
And let's talk about how you came to be a candidate. You worked for about 20 years serving in the U.S. military as not only a Green Beret, eventually a CIA paramilitary officer as well. This all culminated when you were working in the Trump administration, and your wife, who was a naval officer, was actually killed while serving in Syria. You blamed her death on rogue elements within the Trump administration whom undermined the president's withdrawal strategy in Syria. Can you explain how you came to that conclusion?
Yeah, I mean, I was in the military right when the war on terror started. I came in just before 2001. So I was a Green Beret for, I did 11 combat deployments. Then I went right into the CIA as a paramilitary operations officer when I hit the 20-year mark in the military. That was going to be my second career. My late wife, Shannon, was a Navy signals intelligence specialist. She spoke Arabic. So by the time I met her, she already had quite a few combat deployments. She was deployed for the last push to go take out the last bit of ground that ISIS controlled in 2018, and they reached their objective by late November, December of 2018. And that's when Trump sent out a famous tweet. But that tweet also had orders behind it that said, hey, let's get our troops out of Syria, because in Trump's mind, this is what the American people hired him to do. He ran on, hey, ISIS is out of control. We are going to go in there. We're going to crush and dismantle ISIS. And we very much did that. I was deployed under Obama in 2016 in the counter-ISIS mission, and we had no direction whatsoever. We had no authorities. We were over there very much in harm's way, taking casualties, but we didn't have the leadership at the executive level to make hard decisions and give us the authorities to take out ISIS. Trump came in 2017, and within less than probably about 18 months, we had defeated the Islamic Caliphate, lock, stock, and barrel. They didn't control any more ground. Now, there was a lot of people in permanent Washington, D.C., the administrative state, the national security blob, whatever you want to call it, that they really wanted to stay in Syria. They were mad that we had left Iraq in the first place. We had reestablished a foothold back in northern Iraq, which is relatively peaceful, but we had a foothold in Syria. But that was all tied up with the counter-ISIS mission. But these people at the very senior levels of the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, the State Department, there was a lot of Obama holdouts and even some old George Bush people that just got swept into the Trump administration, like Secretary of Defense Mattis, that they wanted to stay there forever, but they also wanted to turn this into regime change 2.0 against Assad, which to me at that point in my career, I was like, have you guys seen, like, did you guys fight a different war than me? Because every time we do this regime change thing, like, it doesn't work out in our favor. So I was amazed that these people even had the audacity to talk like this. But the orders came down in December of 2018. They were supposed to be out of there. My late wife and everybody else that was in Syria at the time, they were supposed to get on airplanes and fly to Erbil by Christmas Eve of 2018. Now, I could see this all play out in real time. There was a lot of feet dragging going on. There was senior level officials from the administration who were giving the orders, and there was these mid-level appointees that were just like, well, we have to wait till we get more orders, just really tying it up in bureaucratic speak. Because if you've been in the government for any length of time, you understand how to drag your feet. It's not very complicated to do. And unfortunately, I don't think Trump had enough folks that were loyal to him and to his agenda to understand what was happening at the deeper levels of bureaucracy. So I saw this play out. I was talking with my wife, and I was like, I think that they're going to keep you guys there. And she's like, yeah, I kind of get that feeling too. But we do have orders to be out of here by Christmas Eve of 2018. And tragically, they remained. And then about a month later, on the 16th of January, 2019, her and 3 other Americans were killed by a suicide bomber in Manbij, Syria. So I had a brief I decided I was going to resign from the government at that time. We have 2 kids, 5 and 7 now, but they were very young. So I just really wanted to focus on my children. But I had a chance to meet Trump at Dover, and I basically told him what I just told you. I said, look, you don't know who I am, but I've been fighting these wars at the ground level since they started, really. And you're getting it right in a way that no other president has. Your instincts are right. Like when Trump as a candidate said that, like, we got lied to about Iraq and we never should have gone in the first place and we should get out, like that he was 100% right, his gut instinct. So I shared that with him, but then I just told him, I was like, you're getting undermined in a way that I've never seen before at the mid to senior levels. And I came in under Clinton, I served all through Bush, I served all through Obama. And what I saw on day one of the Trump administration, the way that we had mid-level bureaucrats who just basically said that we don't have to listen to the Trump administration. Like, and that's ultimately what led to my wife getting killed.
And so that's kind of how you called it the permanent element within Washington. Yeah. Every time a president comes into power, we talk about all of the secretaries of defense, secretaries of state. They change. Sometimes they're even people who had previously served in other administrations, but the vast majority of these institutions don't change. The same people remain from one administration to the next. And you're saying that based on what you saw, a lot of these elements were, at least in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, places where you had experience, driven by the interest of permanent war, not even fulfilling necessarily the initial objective that they came out with when launching any of these individual endeavors. Are you seeing that same mentality play out when it comes to Ukraine?
Yeah, and this is at a very basic level, taking out all the greed of the military-industrial complex. Like, you got to understand that people depending on the intelligence community, like they're a weapon, they're a tool. If you point them in the right direction, they're going to do good things. If you just say, hey, I want you to go to country X and do stuff, which is basically what we get told all the time. Like, hey, right now the effort is in Ukraine, so we're going to deploy 100,000 combat troops to Poland, to Romania. Like, what they're going to do is they're going to escalate because they're our military. That's all that they know. But we're supposed to have civilian leadership that reflects the national security interests of our country, but also the will of the American people. But really, since 9/11, we've basically just not given the military industrial complex, really any guidance. And so you give them a country, point at any country on the map, and they're going to find a reason why we need to be there. But this is where we need actual sober, reasonable leadership that comes in there and says, like, you guys aren't in charge. You guys are the ones that do the tasks that we tell you to, but actually provide that civilian oversight. And so when we saw this over and over again in the war on terror, like we went to Afghanistan, I think for all the right reasons in 2001, bin Laden and al-Qaeda were there. So yeah, let's go get them. But the second bin Laden crossed over into Pakistan, a country we have a dubious relationship, we give billions of dollars of foreign aid to, that's when George Bush was like, well, I changed my mind. We're going to build a democratic government here in Afghanistan. And that's when I think a lot of policymakers should have stepped in and said, that's not at all what we gave you permission to do. And then it was the same thing in Iraq. At least there was a vote for the Iraq war. But the second that we realized that, hey, we got lied to on this thing, there should have been policymakers hitting the brakes. But that's when the military industrial complex can easily step in with, lobbyist money and all the different incentives to just keep us in permanent war. And it's tragic that we're not seeing that right now, because the exact same things are playing out in Ukraine. But you're not allowed to say that. And if you say that now, you're a Putin sympathizer, or you hate Western democracy or something.
Yeah, I actually wanted to play a clip from a debate between you and your Democratic challenger, Marie Perez.
If Ukraine falls, Europe is in danger. And if Europe is in danger, we are in danger. There is a vital security interest in America in preventing the kind of despotism that Putin is advancing from taking over more of our world.
What is it, this mentality, if we don't fight Putin over there, we're going to fight him over here? Where is it coming from? And how do you think you could use your experience in the intelligence community, if elected to Congress, to poke a hole in that narrative?
Yeah, this is where I get kind of frustrated with, I guess, maybe just the short-term memory of Americans. We were told the exact same thing about Saddam Hussein. Like, we were told that Saddam's got weapons of mass destruction. This is a big deal because he also has ties to al-Qaeda. So, like, if we don't go fight him right now over there in Iraq, like, they're coming here, like, next week somehow. They can never explain it. So for me, with my experience in the intelligence community, because we have intelligence officials that are saying these things. They're saying that Vladimir Putin must be stopped. If you look at all the the former intelligence officials that are on Twitter, that do the media surrogate tour every single Sunday. This is very much their narrative. They're like, man, if we don't stop this guy Putin right now, if we don't stop the Russian army, next thing you know, they're taking Ukraine, then they're going to be in France, and then we're fighting them. Like it's really just devoid, though, of any facts. So for me, as a lawmaker, hopefully here come January, I would say, okay, that's fine. Let's actually have a hearing where you guys share with us your intelligence assessment, because what we're seeing on the ground, it looks like the Russians can't get their tanks out of the mud in eastern Ukraine. Like, we're told two narratives at the same time. If you look at, anything coming out of Ukraine, it looks like the Russians are actually performing badly. Now, to what degree, to what degree that they're performing poorly, that remains to be seen, because a lot of what comes out of Ukraine is propaganda. But what is for certain is that Russia is not having their way with Ukraine in any way, shape, or form. So this narrative that, like, any minute now, Putin's going to be planting the Russian flag in Poland, and then in Germany, and then in France, like, it doesn't make it. It's just devoid of any facts. So for me, I would basically say, show me your math. Show me how you got to this point. Don't speak in vague generalities. Don't say rah, 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 we need to fight him over there, so we don't fight him over here. Like, show me the actual intelligence, and then show me the source of that intelligence. Like, and they're always going to say, well, like, we can't disclose any of this because of sources and methods, and they make it seem like it's some sort of black magic recipe. It's not. There's ways that we can hide the sources to make sure that they're protected, if that's the case. But I mean, really, this one, because we're talking about a very conventional military, I think it's pretty easy to quickly disprove the narrative that Putin any minute now is just going to take over all of Western Europe.
Would you support any initiatives on the Hill to withdraw the United States from NATO or limit funding?
Well, I would. Well, I think the first step is that we say, hey, look, Zelensky, we've given you enough to defend your country. Your people have performed exceptionally well. But we're not going to give you any more money for anything unless you're sitting at the negotiating table. If you want to get one more penny from the United States of America, you've got to be at the negotiating table. I think we have a potential, because I think things aren't going well for Putin, that he would be open to an off ramp, like say, hey, if you're at the negotiating table as well, we can guarantee you that NATO will not expand to your borders anymore. And this is a place where I think we need a lot of U.S. leadership, because at the end of the day, like, NATO's cute. They've got a multi-million-dollar compound there in Brussels. But at the end of the day, NATO is America. Like, there is no NATO without America. And so I do think we need to really pull back from that. It was a post-World War II organization that basically met its intent with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the entire doctrine of containment that got us to break the back of the Soviet Union without going to a kinetic war with them was containment. And the guys that wrote that, George Kennan, they always said, don't push NATO up on the border of Russia, which is pretty simple to me, because if Russia started, conducting regime change wars in Mexico City or in Quebec, I'm pretty sure we'd want to get them out of our hemisphere as well. So I would definitely support us using aid to get Ukraine to the negotiating table. But also, I think long term, we do need to get out of NATO. I just think it does nothing but escalate tensions over there.
And some people would say that we're also subsidizing these European states that don't have to pay for their militaries. They get to have healthcare, free education, all these things that we don't get in the United States. And we're just footing the bill for their militaries over there. Finally, since you're running for Congress, another major issue when it comes towards the fact that technically Congress is the only entity that has the power to declare war, and yet it's getting away with greenlighting billions and billions of dollars to a war in Ukraine, because it's a proxy war, essentially, right? The United States would claim, well, we're not fighting the war, so why does Congress need to have any say in whether or not we're fighting it? How can we square that issue so that actually, if we're going to participate, sending billions of dollars to the Ukraine front, we should actually have a vote? Is the United States going to war in Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, I have an issue with the way that we give out a lot of our foreign aid. I think that needs some heavy auditing. But it's clear to anybody that, like, what we're doing now with Ukraine, we're not just sending them foreign aid. This isn't some defense cooperation that we're selling them some Abrams tanks or something like we do with so many countries throughout the world. this is a clear case where we're sending large packages of U.S. military equipment. Lend-Lease, we haven't used, I don't think, since World War II. We gave them Lend-Lease to lease our military equipment. And then if you just look at the rhetoric, the second that the rhetoric kicked up coming from the Biden administration, especially when Biden like really just used reckless terms like, Vladimir Putin can't stay in power. We have members of Congress who are sitting on the floor saying that we're at war right now with Putin. That's a time where I think we do need to say, okay, stop. Before we authorize one more penny for any of this, let's have an actual war powers debate. All you people that feel really passionate about us continuing this escalation, the fact that our intelligence community is out there bragging about how we're providing targeting data to kill Russian soldiers and Russian generals, like, okay, we've clearly crossed a line. And if we're going to do this, then I'm against it. But I'm just one representative. But all you other representatives that are for it, you need to put your name on the dotted line. And you need to look at the intent. Like, why did the framers give Congress that power? Because we're the closest representation to the American people that will have to go and fight and die in these wars, and they'll have to foot the bill. So all these congressmen that feel so passionately about this, you got Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney and all them, like, did they ever go back to their district and have a town hall and say, hey, people of Wyoming, are you really excited? Are you guys with me? Should we send billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine, and then maybe deploy your sons and daughters to Poland and Romania? And if things go wrong, they're going to go to the front line. Like, they never had the burden of having to explain that to their constituents because of the way that we're just continuing to authorize all this continuous aid. So I think we have to really rein back in Congress's ability to launch wars. And the way that we do that is just by saying, hey, let's withhold funds. If this is something that the country is going to be on board with, go get the country on board. Put your name on the dotted line.
Liz Cheney may not have had the burden of speaking with her constituents at a town hall, but she had the burden of a re-election campaign, and it didn't work out too well for her. Yep. I think this is one of the most important issues of our time, the War Powers Act, the fact that we've seen it slowly inch out of control from Iraq to Syria, and now to the point that we're perhaps at the risk of a confrontation with Russia, a nuclear power in the Ukraine conflict. So, hey, if you can work with people on the Hill, if you're elected to Congress, to make sure that we can rein that in, I think that would be great. Joe Kent, candidate for Washington's 3rd Congressional District, thanks so much.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.